The following program contains graphic images. Viewer discretion is advised.
Early August 1995. Unusually cool weather in Los Angeles, with highs on some days only into the low 60s. On local TV, the standard fare of commercials for back to school and end of summer sales. Timothy McVeigh has been indicted by a federal grand jury on charges of blowing up the federal building in Oklahoma City. The White House announces sweeping regulations to curtail smoking among teens. And in downtown Los Angeles, jurors for the trial of the century are in for a short week, some noticing O.J. Simpson's confident expression, and a few seeing the ongoing pain etched on the faces of those who knew and loved Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. This week in The People versus O.J. Simpson, the jury hears from a famous expert, the man who investigated the assassination of President Kennedy and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Michael Baden testifies, saying mistakes were made during Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman's autopsies. I'm Roger Cossack, and this is OJ25.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Record should reflect that we've been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. The defense, Mr. Shapiro, are you going to present the next witness?
Your Honor, with the court's permission, we call Dr. Michael Baden.
All right, Dr. Baden.
Dr. Baden was the chief medical examiner in New York City for a time, and over the years, he really carved out a name for himself, not only as one of the top forensic pathologists in the country, but also as one of the top expert witnesses.
When did you initially get involved in the case regarding O.J. Simpson?
I was called by you around midnight on June 14th of last year.
And did I request that you immediately come out for consultation?
Yes.
Would you point out to the ladies and gentlemen of the jury the highlights of commissions that you have been appointed to by the United States government?
The highlight would be I was asked to be chairman of the forensic pathology panel that was formed to investigate the deaths of President John F. Kennedy and Dr. Martin Luther King.
In the course of your career, could you estimate for the jury how many autopsies you have personally performed?
Over 20,000 autopsies.
Have you reviewed every note, memorandum, and report done by the LA County Coroner's Office regarding the deaths of Ronald Goldman and Nicole Simpson?
Yes. I was able to see photographs of the remains and not able to see the remains.
Can you use me as Nicole Brown Simpson and indicate how, in your opinion, Nicole Brown Simpson and the perpetrator could have been face to face?
In this manner?
Doctor, in this position, could that fatal stab wound number 1 have been inflicted on Mr. Goldman?
Yes, it's possible.
Did you, in your initial observations at the coroner's office, find any errors or omissions that were significant?
Yes. Damage to the brain from some blunt force that had not been recorded. We found a cut through one of the areas of the Adam's apple that had not been recorded.
What kind of evidence was lost in this case by the way the coroner transported the body, in your opinion?
There were blood drops on the back of Miss Simpson that should have been examined to determine who the blood came from.
Her back had a lot of splatters of blood in the form of cast-off. Cast-off is important in that it indicates that it probably came from a murder weapon, obviously. The cast-off blood from Nicole's back was not preserved. Very upsetting when I got there for the autopsies.
Maybe it came from the perpetrator. There was material on the hands. Often in struggles, the victim has trace evidences of hairs and fibers and blood on the hands that can be lost if the hands are not properly covered. Dr. Lakshmanan did answer questions that I felt were possibilities, but in my opinion, it doesn't help the finders of fact because anything is possible.
When you use the term could be, is that a term of medical certainty?
Could be is not medical certainty, but it's based on education and the findings that it's a good possibility that's what could have happened.
Can you tell within a reasonable degree of medical certainty how many killers were involved in this case?
No. The medical examiner cannot say how many knives were involved.
Doctor, are you able to say that, in fact, only one knife caused all of the sharp force injuries to Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman?
Yes.
And whether or not a number of the wounds were caused by double-edged blades, too. So the medical examiner cannot tell how many weapons and whether they were single and double-edged.
Do you have an opinion as to the approximate minimum dimensions that any such knife would have?
I can only give an approximate estimation. A 6-inch long blade, single-edge cutting blade with a blunt edge up to 1/8 inch in width and about 3/4 inch wide.
Human beings are not able to be studied like worms or something. We can't do controlled studies of feeding somebody and then killing them, of a human. We can't do controlled studies of cutting people's necks.
The following program contains graphic images. Viewer discretion is advised.
Now, doctor, is it true, sir, that 3 to 4 times of your annual income is made from privately retained cases rather than the $39,000 or $40,000 you make from New York?
That's correct.
I think everybody broke records for profits. I've had paparazzi and guys come up to me now and they give me free pictures and stuff because they said they paid off their boat or they paid off their mortgage during the trial back then. My life is everybody's trying to make money on me.
Dr. Baden, a couple of preliminary questions. On these privately retained cases, you are paid, is that correct?
That's the intent. It doesn't always work that way, but I submit a bill, yes.
O.J. Simpson had the dream team. His money allowed him to get the best defense and to pay for the best defense that he could have.
Approximately how many cases have you been retained on in your career for which you're paid, for which you did not personally do the autopsy?
Lots.
And doctor, when you do this, do you ever tell the party retaining you that you can't accept this work because since you didn't do the autopsy, it would be pure speculation for you to review these materials and render opinions?
No.
There was some discussion by Dr. Lakshmanan about the state of consciousness of Nicole Brown Simpson.
Miss Brown was on the ground, face down, with this wound was inflicted. My opinion is that the head was extended backwards and the knife was used to cause this incise/stab wound from the left to the right. Major wound to the neck is the final wound.
We know that because of the blood pattern on the step below her head, it indicates her hair went through the blood as she was grabbed, probably by the hair, and her neck was pulled back, and he slit her throat, left to right.
In my opinion, she wasn't lying unconscious on the ground. When she suffered the fatal cut wound of the neck, her neck was above the bottom staircase. It was at least 18, 20 inches off the ground. because much of the spurting blood from the cut through the carotid arteries went in that direction, toward the top of the first staircase and the riser on the second staircase.
Doctor, you remind us, sir, that you were still under oath, and Mr. Kellberg, you may continue with your cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Doctor, a person could be unconscious and laying on the steps at the same time. Isn't that correct?
In general, a person could be, yes.
Doctor, how many of those, first of all, do you rely on any study of unconscious people who are killed by sharp force injuries to support your opinion?
Mr. Kellberg, as a forensic pathologist, I have to include all of what I know, my training, my experience, my reading. Not every human beings are not able to be studied like worms or something. We can't do controlled studies of feeding somebody and then killing them, of a human. We can't do controlled studies of cutting people's necks. This is my experience as a forensic pathologist, and I don't think anybody's necessarily done a study, but certainly there have been lots of papers written about multiple cut wounds in suicides.
It was a very violent struggle, obviously. And we know that's what happened. There were defense wounds on Ron Goldman. It was obviously the way Ron Goldman was lying and his wounds, there was a hell of a struggle. I mean, they were going around on the ground, there's blood everywhere.
Why is it your opinion that there was a struggle between Nicole Brown Simpson and her assailant or assailants prior to the time she died?
Well, because there were about 9 or 10 stab wounds and cut wounds on her body before she suffered the fatal injury. Ronald Goldman did struggle with his assailant or assailants.
Now, is there any evidence that Mr. Goldman attempted to kick his assailant or assailants?
There's a cut on the top of the shoe near the toe area.
Sir, did you say to a reasonable medical certainty you believe that that cut to the tip of the right shoe of Mr. Goldman was inflicted by the knife of the perpetrator who murdered Mr. Goldman?
I said indicative, which means more likely than not. It's more than 51%.
Well, sir, you have no idea, do you, when that cut may have been created on the tip of that shoe, do you, sir?
That's not true. It looked like a recent, fresh cut from the edges and the margins.
Brian Kellberg. I've known Brian a long time, a very, very intelligent lawyer. He just has a very keen intellect and the ability to drill inside a lot of issues and types of evidence that others may not get to. He just drills down to a very deep level.
Now, doctor, you said this morning that you are critical of any forensic pathologist who would get on the witness stand and testify to possibilities. Isn't that what you said this morning?
What I said is that the witness, me in the blue chair, Dr. Lakshmanan in the blue chair here, can only answer the questions that the lawyers put to us. And I think we try to answer the questions the best we can. But if all we say is it's possible that it happened by a bushy-haired stranger who was right-handed from behind, yes, but it's also equally consistent with a bald-headed midget from the front who was left-handed. It's all, it depends on what kind of information I want to give across as an expert.
Now, sir, didn't you, in the course of your direct examination, at least 10 or 12 times, offer answers that included the word possibility when asked hypothetical questions?
I don't think so. It's possible. That's possible, but I don't think so.
The deputies immediately gathered us all up and started rolling us out the door and all, and getting us out of there and getting us away from everything.
The following program contains graphic images. Viewer discretion is advised.
I was sitting there in court and Marshall made this comment about I was a different person. What I took pride in was the fact that everybody who ever played with me, everybody who ever worked with me, whether it was Chevrolet or Hertz or NBC or ABC, would always tell you. And any interview that anybody around me ever gave my whole life was, what you see is what you get with OJ. So it wasn't when the camera went off, I was a different person. And I like to think, with few exceptions, I'm that person today. And that's why I try to be nice to everybody. And if they're not nice in return, that's their problem.
Dr. Michael Baden is on the witness stand. Dr. Baden, would you resume the witness stand, please?
Doctor, would you agree that common sense would suggest that it is not logical that somebody would take a knife and carefully put in 2 superficial incise wounds on the neck of that same person after there's been a battle royale?
It was dark, and the perpetrator wasn't sure that Mr. Goldman was dead, and that's why 5 minutes later or 10 minutes later, additional stab wounds were made.
You see the photos of him and all of the promise that lay ahead. There was so much speculation, so much of it was mean-spirited, and I think that the defense wanted to portray him as something else. But they also wanted to portray this as some Colombian drug deal gone bad, and I don't believe any of that.
You testified yesterday regarding a contusion along this knuckle of the right hand.
Yes.
And that was the contusion or bruise which you described as being consistent with a blow, a closed fist being thrown against the perpetrator, right, sir?
I think they were all consistent with blows against another person's skin. So theoretically, I could punch Mr. Shapiro and rub my finger across his, yeah, he punched me better, and rub my finger across the face and get a little bit of a friction.
Now, doctor, you said yesterday that you didn't think Dr. Lakshmanan's opinion was correct regarding these injuries being received by Mr. Goldman as he's flailing backwards in that confined space in the Bundy walkway area in an effort to ward off the assailant.
A rubbing alone would cause an abrasion or a friction burn. A punch would cause a black and blue. It has to be a punch and a rubbing at the same time.
Court TV producers meticulously write down everything they see in the courtroom. Decades later, dozens of binders hold thousands of pages. Descriptions of subtle moments that foreshadow which way the jurors might ultimately lean.
Seemingly oblivious to the impatience of a judge and jury anxiously anticipating their afternoon appointments, Brian Kellberg was pleading for another 15 and then another 5 minutes, promising he was almost finished. He finally wrapped his cross-examination after Judge Ito told him to listen to the jurors' groans.
This is the last area. Is this that? Hopefully 5 minutes. Your Honor, I can't control the length of the answer.
You just heard the reaction from the jury. We're going to quit now.
Everyone, including myself, are still showing steady signs of anguish and frustration over this long and arduous ordeal. Apparently, they gave us this book for another set of notes, and I started using this in a journal. So all of this is journal. We're down to 1 video per night in each video room, so if you don't like the video that's being shown, you just, and I have here, on entertainment for the evening. As I've mentioned before, the women are fully entrailed in the crochet.
I think it was the longest sequestration in U.S. history. These jurors were kept away from their family, were kept away from their friends for the entirety of the trial. Bussed back and forth to a hotel, went on some outings.
I just tried to go along with the program and not make waves. Least I become labeled a troublemaker, and we know what happens to them around here.
Have a pleasant weekend. Enjoy the activities this weekend. We'll see you Monday morning, 9 o'clock.
as in anything we ever did, they tell us, load up at 5 o'clock. Don't tell you what you're doing, just load up. Be ready to go. And you go at the end of the hallway here, right by the service elevator, you line up, they stick you in a vehicle. They took us up in groups. Actually had an opportunity to fly the blimp itself, which was a very interesting situation because, of course, you got the pedals and you got the hand things that you're working it all. That was probably one of the more fun days that I ever had there, was doing that. As they were driving up, of course, we were all sitting there, we started to realize, what are we doing here? And then we started realizing, well, maybe we're going to see The Tonight Show, because we realized they're taking us on outings all the time. So once it became apparent, everybody was happy about it. So it was a good experience. That was great. The deputies immediately gathered us all up and started rolling us out the door and all, and getting us out of there and getting us away from everything.
Those jurors spent as much time behind bars as O.J. Simpson did, for all intents and purposes.
The scrutiny of the deputies themselves, it was made for a very strange experience. And I'll always say, the deputies that oversaw us at the beginning of the trial, I mean, these guys were like ruthless people. And I tried to explain to some of my fellow jurors also, because some of the other jurors were having some really experience. And I tried to say, are you aware that all of these LA County Sheriff's deputies, they all have to spend time in the LA County prison system? Oh, I didn't know that. And I'm like, yeah, so again, this is the reason why you feel like you're being treated like a prison, because these guys, that's all they're used to dealing with.
Other judges might not have sequestered during the trial. They would have waited until the jury deliberations to sequester. But Judge Ito made a decision that there was so much publicity and so much attention that it was the wise thing to do. Does sequestration work is the next question. Or does material filter into the jury box through pillow talk and other kinds of seepage? And I think some of it does.
He says, I love Nicole, but I'm not in love with Nicole. She was my wife for a long time, but I'm not in love with Nicole anymore.
As OJ25 continues, the impact of forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Baden's testimony is unclear. It's all part of the defense's strategy to undermine the prosecution's case, namely that sloppy police work made any conclusions about O.J. Simpson's guilt seem at best lazy, or at worst, part of a conspiracy to frame Simpson.
All right, back on the record in the Simpson matter, all parties are again present. Counsel, what we're here for is a discovery proceeding to determine the whereabouts, history, etc., of a certain telephone answering machine tape recording.
The prosecution wants to take the jury there, back to that point in time, to really give them a clear picture of what the defendant was thinking, because with the elements of the crime, they have to establish specific intent in a first-degree murder case. So they want to show what's called in Latin the mens rea, the guilty mind. And then they have to marry that with the actus reus, the guilty act, to show that these two came together on the date of the incident in question.
We'll call Gretchen Stockdale. All right, Ms. Stockdale.
Were you acquainted with the defendant back in 1994, Fuhrman?
Yes.
And as of June 12, 1994, had you been dating him for some period of time?
No, I wouldn't characterize it as dating. We had a good communicative friendship. We ran into each other several times over the years. And in 1993, around the fall, I contacted him to actually ask his advice on an investment issue.
Between 1988 and 1994, did you ever meet him for dinner?
No, actually,
Counsel, all I'm really interested in is the flavor, the nature of the relationship, so let's not go too far with this.
Okay. All right. Were there any intimate dinners that you had? During
No.
the scope of time you saw each other?
No,
Did you ever see each other in person?
Yes, as I said, I ran into him several times on different occasions. NFL functions, charity events. I actually did run into him into a restaurant one time. And he was on a date with Paula, and I joined them briefly.
And did you discuss with him the nature of his relationship with Paula Barbieri?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustain.
Did you discuss with him the nature of his relationship with Nicole Brown Simpson?
Same objection.
Overruled.
Yes, periodically.
You know, they were divorced. They had been divorced. And OJ had told us, he said, it's over. He said, Nicole and I have talked. We're gonna be parents to our kids, but it's done. He says, I love Nicole, but I'm not in love with Nicole. You know, she'll always be a part of my life. She was my wife for a long time, but I'm not in love with Nicole anymore.
How many times would you say in the year of 1994 did you have conversations with him about Nicole in his home on Rockingham?
I'm not really sure. I couldn't give you a number.
Can you give me an estimate? Like
how many times we spoke about Nicole?
In 1994?
Specifically at his home.
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking me? Oh, 3 times.
Okay. And when in 1994 was it that you had those conversations about her in his home?
Counsel, I think our focus here is the tape, though. That's what we're interested in, correct?
Yes, Ron.
All right.
Marcia Clark was somebody who thought she knew everything, and she was arrogant.
This absurd thing here?
Excuse me, Counsel.
Let me show you.
I beg your pardon.
Wait. Is that a question, Ms. Clark?
It was foundational to a question. I wanted to show him the report.
Be careful, Ms. Clark.
Overconfident.
Let me also then add to the record Mr. Cochran's beaming face laughter at the excusal of juror number 353. Let me also add to the record Mr. Cochran's negative remarks about the few remaining white jurors on this panel.
And they did just about everything wrong.
All right, counsel, can we speed this up? I mean, is the issue the check-in and the check-out times?
Yes, Your Honor, almost done.
Under the rules we have in California, we were due to receive reciprocal discovery. We anticipated that there would probably be some element of hiding the ball by the defense. It was right out of the box, looking like this was going to be a trial of surprise and by ambush.
Had he made any overtures to you about becoming his girlfriend?
No.
Oral. Answer will stand. Let's move on to the tape and the whereabouts of the tape, please.
All right. When you retrieved the message, did it indicate that the message from the defendant came in at 7:35 p.m. on the night of June the 12th?
Yes, it did.
Quote, hey, Gretchen, sweetheart, it's Orenthal James, who is finally at a place in his life where he is like totally unattached with everybody. Ha ha. And in any event, I've got a Sunday evening. I guess I'm catching a red eye at midnight or something to Chicago, but I'll be back Monday night. If you leave me a message, leave it on 310 and then a number. Do you recall what I've just stated to you?
It appears close, yes.
You pressed the button save.
Yes.
Then what did you do? Did you ever retrieve that tape physically?
At a later date, I asked for a copy.
From your answering service?
Yes.
And they gave it to you?
They mailed it to me.
Do you recall having a conversation with a DA investigator by the name of Dana Thompson on June the 21st, 1995?
Yes.
And do you recall telling him that you turned over that tape to William Pavlik, the defense investigator, in September of 1994?
Yes.
Did you expect...
Are there any copies of this tape anywhere? Did you make any copies before you gave it to Mr. Pavlik?
Yes, there was another copy made.
All right, how did you do that?
I held up a cassette recorder to the telephone, the actual telephone.
And what happened to that copy?
That has been taped over.
Prosecutors argue the tape signifies Simpson and Nicole may have fought just before the call. The defense has refused to turn over their copy, arguing it is not discoverable and is exculpatory, hence does not have to be provided to the prosecution. So, prosecutors must now do their own legwork to find a copy of the tape.
The issue was whether or not Ms. Stockdale had a copy that was still available. She's indicated that she taped over the tape a number of times, so in all likelihood, it's not recoverable, except for perhaps by the NSA, and I don't think they're going to help us with this.
You don't know whether any error actually occurred with the handling of those samples, do you?
I play golf when I come home. I raise my kids. I read, I write a little bit. I may go to a movie. So I try to stay as far under the radar as you can. For the most part, people want to take me wherever I go. I'm the paparazzi. They shoot me whenever I go out.
At this time, the defense calls Professor Terrence Speed.
My name is Terrence Speed, S-P-E-E-D.
Jurors love forensic evidence. And there's something called the CSI effect. There are lots of scholarly articles that have been written on this. And essentially, it's a concept that shows that because of the popularity of criminal trials and then dramas we see on television based on crimes, that jurors come to expect forensic evidence. They are looking for fingerprints. They're looking for DNA, for blood spatter analysis.
Did you review any of the testimony of different witnesses?
I did.
And which testimony have you reviewed?
I've reviewed Dr. Weir's.
Any genetic entity, if it can be measured or counted, I can analyze it. I analyze data which eventually depends on the DNA. The most frequent is 1 in 6 million.
And that range goes to what?
To 1 in 600 billion.
I reviewed Mr. Sims.
Do you agree that those two samples are consistent from having come from the same source?
Yes, they are.
The two samples are Nicole Brown and the SOC 13A.
Yes.
What do these numbers tell the jury about the probability of a false or misleading match being reported due to errors in the collection and handling of samples?
Nothing.
What do these numbers tell us about the probability of a false or misleading match being reported due to evidence tampering?
Nothing.
This is great lawyering. Something we've taught students is that you take your good facts, your bad facts, and your facts that are beyond change, and you look at them. And the whole goal is to take those bad facts and make them good facts. And here, that's exactly what the defense did. This was introduced as something very damaging by the prosecution to the defense's case. And what did they do? They honed in on human error, the fact that human beings make mistakes. And so they took that bad fact and made it a good fact for the defense. They pulled it over to their side in saying to the jury, hey, you might not be able to trust this evidence because it doesn't account for the human error that could have occurred in a laboratory.
I reviewed Dr. Cotton's.
The figure that would be most rare is for African Americans, and that number is 1 in 530 billion.
Robin Cotton was one of the outside experts who gave these huge odds, like 1 in billions, that this could be anyone's blood but O.J. Simpson.
Do you recall when she testified that with respect to one of the batches of 50 samples that they received, that there was a match that she gave a frequency for of 1 in 1.8 billion. Do you remember that?
I do.
Later on, the submitting agency told her that they had a false positive. Do you recall her then saying that, having learned that it was a false positive, that the statistic of 1 in 1.8 billion was irrelevant? Do you remember that?
I do.
And do you agree with that?
I do, yes.
There were other forensic specialists that came in and started just nitpicking at different little aspects of how the whole forensic investigation was done. And so that started, at that point, I started having doubts as to whether the case was strong or not.
Is it also important, from a statistical standpoint, to consider the chance that the reported matches are the result of error in crime scene collection and packaging?
I believe so.
It is important to consider, from a statistical standpoint, the chance that the reported matches are the result of error when the evidence is unpacked at the Los Angeles Police Department.
Yes.
If you were to consider, simply for the purpose of this question, the Bundy drops on the walkway, sir, would it be important to consider the chance that it may really be Mr. Simpson's blood on that walkway, but that those drops were left by Mr. Simpson at an earlier date?
That's speculation. You can quantify that.
Sustained.
I believe that the possibility of errors can never be ruled out, and therefore there is an incompleteness in any evaluation that is based on the assumption that no errors could have happened.
You have simply alerted the jury to consider the possibility of certain errors which may have occurred in this case. Isn't that true?
Objection argumentative to the formal question.
Oh.
I think the answer simply is inappropriate there. I spoke on one aspect.
You don't know whether any error actually occurred with the handling of those samples, do you?
I certainly don't.
You could be right about 1,000 things and prove every one, and then they just say, well, you're just a racist.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Well, the racial thing really bothered me. Still to this day, it bothers me because I was raised in San Francisco, a very diverse city racially. And my mother always raised us that you judge people by their character and what they have to offer and their contributions and not by the color of their skin. So to find myself in the middle of it, it still disturbs me, even though I, for the most part, is normal. I blame the media for it because it was the media that focused on it almost immediately.
Tapes which were turned over this afternoon are tapes which I went to North Carolina, pursued through the North Carolina Court of Appeals, and then asked to be brought here. They are copies of the originals.
Mark Fuhrman was an intelligent police officer who presented himself as being able to assess what was happening in this case, presenting evidence in this case in a way that was rational and thoughtful. That's how he first came off. As the trial went on, and as we learned more information about Fuhrman, that veneer kind of came off, especially with the woman, the screenwriter in North Carolina, who had the tapes of him.
I made arrangements in talking to Ms. McKinney, because she'll still be coming to California with the originals for this court. Those tapes will be turned over to the petitioner's counsel, myself. Mr. Simpson paid for the copies of those tapes, paid for the reproduction of those transcripts.
Back on July 14, when we heard of the existence of these tapes, we came to the court ex parte and advised the court of what we had heard and learned about these tapes. And we asked the court for guidance. We didn't hide the ball. We didn't hide the fact of the existence of these tapes, if they existed, and we weren't sure. There was no provision under the law at this point that would require the court to surrender our tapes to Mr. Simpson or to the defense.
We will, at the appropriate time, if they want to make motions, they'll be available to them. But this sneak attack of trying to go and subpoena the lawyers for the tapes, which we have now been given custody of by the North Carolina court, we have paid for, is just not right, Your Honor. And so what I'm asking is that the court turn those tapes over to me right now. They would have been turned over to me this morning at 10 o'clock. And by now, I would have had a transcript under seal for this court.
And now these tapes are under the court's jurisdiction. This isn't an impeachment issue or a discovery issue or a 1054 issue, and that is because these tapes are not in the defendant's possession. But we're not here this afternoon to deprive Mr. Cochran of access to those tapes. We have no objection to Mr. Cochran having access to our tapes after we copy them.
This is not an issue where they have any standing at all. They can subpoena the two lawyers all they want, but the subpoena Duke taken for these copies of these tapes are the fruit of the defense labor, paid for by Mr. Simpson. He's the one who went to bat to uphold this court's order.
And I think we're being awfully kind this afternoon to offer Mr. Cochran a copy of our tapes, but this is unnecessary. This fight over these tapes is unnecessary. We don't want to delay this trial. We have a jury that has been sequestered for 7 months. We don't want to be in a position where Mr. Fuhrman or some other witness is confronted with these tapes, and then we are forced into a position where we need to take days to review 15 hours.
Your Honor, let me make this as clear as possible. These are Mr. Simpson's tapes that he has paid for. These are the copies of the tapes that I arranged for, Your Honor. Yes, but Your Honor, how many times can I say that since they want to help me so much? These are the tapes that I went through. Where were they in North Carolina when the court ruled against us, when Ms. Clark was fighting me until the North Carolina Court of Appeals do it?
To counsel's characterization of my response, all I did was alert the court to the legalities of the procedure. That's all I did.
I said, where were they? I'm very concerned about security of these things, and we made arrangements to have these brought to us so I could then check the actual transcript that accompanies these tapes, and they would be put in a safe place, and they would not be leaked. I've had the dubious pleasure, if I can use that word, of listening to part of the tapes and having seen the transcripts. There is a lot more to come. I think this is a very, very important part of the case, and we're going to pursue it vigorously.
There is really no life without baggage after that point. I hurt LAPD terribly. Whether it was intentional or not, that's not the point. I hurt my family, my children, a never-ending knife that somebody could pull.
Lee Bailey asked a very, very salient question. He said, Mr. Fuhrman, are you as sure about not having used this word as you are about having found the alleged Rockingham glove? They tied it together. He says, absolutely, sir. That goes to the fundamental credibility of this individual.
You could be right about 1,000 things and prove every one, and then they just say, well, you're just a racist. I can just dismiss everything because of that. We really learn nothing by my execution in public.
As the defense continues to pound away at blood evidence and DNA, there's a surprise on the horizon. Coming up, the defense drops a bombshell on the prosecution's case.
This is a blockbuster. This is a bombshell. This is perhaps the biggest thing that's happened in any case in this country in this decade. And they know it. They've got to face up to it.
That's next on OJ25. I'm Roger Cossack.